Great stuff. Okay, well, thank you for taking the time to join our webinar this morning. My name's Darren Spence, and I'll be hosting this session this morning. The session is being recorded, so hopefully that's okay. So if you want to share the recording afterwards with your colleagues, then you're more than welcome to do so. You'll be sent the link. What I'm going to do is just quickly go through the agenda and just make sure that oh, there's someone else coming in. Just wait for them to come through. Okay. If you just joined, I just mentioned that we're actually recording the session. So if you need to send the recording around afterwards, then that's actually fine. So welcome to our session on helping us understand how better to create a modern workplace environment, putting the Surface very much at the core with the Microsoft 365 stack and tool set around that to really bring to life this great solution. My name is Darren Spence. I'm the Business Development Director at Bytes. I'll be hosting the session today. So first things first, I'll introduce my colleagues in a second. Then we're going to run through why the Surface isn't just another laptop and some of the investments and innovations that Microsoft have made in the Surface portfolio, and hope to bring that to life a bit for you. I'm then going to pass it off to my colleagues who will talk more about the Microsoft toolset that you can use to really bring this solution to life, and how we can take away some of the management headaches with the whole Microsoft 365 solution. So my name is Darren. I've been at Bytes for a number of years now, and like I said, I head up the hardware division, or the client hardware division at Bytes. So my job ultimately is to make sure that we are delivering against our promises and that we have the necessary supply chain operations team in place to deliver against the solutions that you need, very much from a kind of hardware perspective. But I also have a keen interest in how we support customers beyond the hardware into the application set. So I've got two of our partners with us, Hannah and Eamon. I'll let them introduce themselves. Hannah, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so hi there everyone even. My name's Hannah Newman. I have a dual role where I work as a modern workplace and security sales specialist for Bytes, but I also work for one of Bytes' partners, Core, as the partner manager. So lovely to meet you all.
Thanks, Hannah. Good morning, all. My name's Eamon McGann. I'm the Solutions Director at Core. I've been working with Core and Bytes now for a very long time. And my role is architecture, design, particularly on endpoint management and the BMW service, which we will be telling you all about at some point over the next hour or so. So good to meet you all.
Thanks, Aaron, and thanks, Hannah. Yeah, so Bytes very much supply the hardware, and our key responsibility is the management of the hardware and the logistics that surround that, and Core really bring that to life. Okay, so that's how the partnership works. So I thought I'd bring to life a bit about the way the world is changing. I'm not quite sure about you, but I'm sure we're now used to working in this very strange world where people are having to self-isolate or work from home and wait for PCR tests, and it's very much a kind of the new rhythm in the way that we work, and that clearly brings complexities within the IT management sphere and how we're best supporting our home workers and our office workers and our frontline workers as well. So that brings with it some challenges, and really the Surface and Microsoft 365 solution is designed to address those challenges, to make it easier for you to provide the equipment that you need, make sure the equipment has in many cases a dual purpose. So one day your employees might be in the office working, and the next day they might be in the field seeing customers or patients, and they need some versatility in the devices that we're supplying them. So that's very much what we recognise, and that's very much why we lead with the Surface range, because it does bring that versatility to life. What you'll hear as we go through as well is around some of the Microsoft toolset that really is there to support this agile working environment that we are now in, helping you to better support your end users wherever they are, provision the equipment that they need, provide the services and applications that they need wherever they are and whenever they are, and help streamline some of the IT processes to make it easier for you as IT professionals and give your employees a much better experience. So just to take just a few moments to talk more holistically around the Microsoft Surface and touch on the Microsoft 365 solution. But if you weren't already aware, the way the Surface is designed is quite different to how other hardware manufacturers work. Microsoft actually sit their hardware engineers alongside their software engineers. So as they're developing Teams and Windows 11 and all these other great applications that we've come to use every day, The hardware that they test those applications on is the Surface, and equally the Surface is built to bring out the best in those applications. So it is different. Microsoft clearly have a unique position in the marketplace, and which is why that combined experience just makes it better for the employees and easier, hopefully, for you as IT professionals to provide the service that you need. Just want to touch on a bit around how Microsoft is different. Microsoft, their whole ethos is that they develop equipment that can change as the needs of the employees change. So I gave an example that one day they might be in the office doing admin work and processing orders, and the next day they might be on the road or at a site or in front of a patient or a customer, and they need that versatility to make sure that the equipment that they have enables them to do their job without you having to go and buy additional devices for different use cases for the same employee. So very much that's their kind of design ethos, this multi-use device. They also have a very large team that specialises in just making sure that the way that we work as humans is reflective in the way that the devices work as well. So we're using tools such as the pen technology in a way that makes it easy for people to adapt from paper pen to technology. Another couple of things that Microsoft do differently, or certainly have a larger investment in, they have a very large team that specialises in human factors, as it says here. And one of the areas that I think is quite useful to kind of draw here is their inclusivity focus. So that idea that it doesn't matter if people work differently to other people, they're very keen to make sure that their applications and their hardware are fully inclusive and able to adapt to the needs of everybody. They also have large teams that specialise in sound and visuals and just the various different features of the technology that makes the whole experience much better. We have a number of slides behind each of these areas, so if any of these are of interest to you as differentiation points, then please drop me a line and we can expand on these as much as you need to. The key difference also between the Surface range and other devices is that Microsoft only develop for businesses. So they are less interested in the consumer marketplace, which is why all the applications and all the devices that they have are of the specification needed to support working employees. So these include things like the advanced exchange. So if a device breaks, the user can get the replacement device before they send the original device back. So it's quite a different way of working. So employees are never without a device is the kind of the aim that they strive to achieve. The configurations of the devices are at a sufficient level, and in some cases an incredibly high level to meet the demands of the most powerful of users. Within each of their application, their devices, they do have multiple different configurations, as you'd expect. So some are going to be more power users, and some are going to be more at the lower end. The other key thing that Microsoft have got a very big drive on is around the environment, the circular economy, and just making sure that they're doing everything that they can to reduce their footprint on the environment. So if you're working towards your own targets around sustainability, particularly coming off COP26, then the Microsoft story is incredibly powerful. And once again, we have a number of slides around this. If that's something that is of a priority to you, then we have a number of statistics and slideware that we can share with you to really bring that to life. I guess the key thing ultimately, though, is that the devices are liked by employees and they deliver customers a competitive edge. So the edge can come from helping them become a great employer. So when they're attracting top talent, giving people the Surface range is seen as a great benefit to talent that comes into the business. It shows that you're serious about your employees, but also means that your employees can collaborate much more effectively, whether they're at the home or in the office as well. So real business tangible results by investing in this kind of technology. I'm not going to go through every single device. In fact, this is my only slide that has devices on it. I'm going to quickly go through, broadly speaking, the way that Microsoft segment their range, though. So the three at the front there, the Go, the Pro, and the Pro X, are the kind of original tablets that they first invented back in May 2012, I think it was, where the screens are detachable. and they have, clearly all the functionality that you need to address the needs of a user that typically is on the road quite a lot. What I would say around some of the devices that you see in front of you now is that if you're in the market to buy now, and by now I mean in the next week or two, there are some very compelling Black Friday offers that Microsoft have on the table that range from a 10% to a 30% discount, and we can give you information about those specific devices. The Duo that you see on the right hand side is the second generation now, so same size as a mobile phone, a little bit thinner in some cases than some of the phones that you might have seen before that have flip screens, but very much is aimed at providing that dual usage experience to users that are on the road and that want that ability to flip between applications very, very smoothly. The middle layer, the Laptop Go laptop and the Book, as you see there. So the Laptop Go and the laptop have fixed screens, much harder wearing devices, much more powerful. The Book is a very sturdy device, again, has a detachable screen, and the screen also bends right back on itself 180 degrees, 270 degrees rather. So if you want that ability to actually work and flip from a keyboard to a screen, then you can do so in a number of ways. The Studio, the new Studio is incredibly powerful. So not only is the device itself very much feature rich and powerful in itself, but the way the screen pivots is very impressive. So that screen on the left hand side will actually go almost flat. So it's designed for designers and people in marketing teams and CAD designers. And if people want to flip from having the screen in front of them to a screen that is relatively flat that they can then draw on and create some great designs, then the Studio is clearly the device of choice there. And the Hub is their flagship device that sits on the wall and can be moved around from room to room as well. So that is the range. We have clearly all the configurations behind each of these. So if any of those are of interest, then please do let me know. Just want to touch on sustainability just quickly before I hand off to my colleagues. It obviously is a very important issue. Bytes have our own policy around sustainability, and off of the back of COP, we've updated our own policy and ambitions around being carbon neutral. So initially our aim was 2030. We've brought that down now to March of next year. So by March of next year, 8 years ahead of schedule, we ourselves are going to be carbon neutral. And Microsoft themselves clearly have very big strides in this area as well. So as you can see, by 2030, every surface, so all the hardware, the components that you see, and the packaging is going to be 100% recyclable. So it's very much talks to the circular economy that I'll talk about in a second. They are already carbon neutral and have been since the Surface first came out in 2012, but they are striving to be carbon negative by 2030, and zero waste for all of their direct operations. So once again, we have a deck around this if you want to go into a bit more detail around their sustainability credentials. They have also put their devices, or some of the devices, forward to be tested against some of the regulations within the US and Canada, and the devices that you see in front of you there are the ones that have scored most highly in the sustainability rankings. They also have a team focused on the circular economy. This is where effectively there's no waste when you bring out a device and you send it to the workforce, dispose of it and recycle it. They aren't where they want to be yet, but they certainly have an ambition to really improve the way that the standard that they are setting across the industry. And my last slide on this is really a sustainability checklist that, if once again this is something that is high on your radar, then there's a number of different areas here that they have a very strong story around that they can bring to life with more information if you need it. So the raw materials that they use and where they source them from, the conditions of the people that actually put the devices together, how they transport the equipment. So that's things like making sure that the ships that they use are fully loaded and there's the minimum number of vessels needed. The packaging, like I said, is 100% recyclable, and if you wanted to, you could actually go for packaging that is minimum viable, so you can actually reduce the packaging even further if that's something that you need to do. The product life and the recyclability. So what was interesting during COVID, when there was a lot of shortages of devices that were coming out of China, we didn't see such an issue with the Surface range. There were some supply issues, and one of the reasons for that is because a lot of the devices themselves are manufactured in the States. and because of that, they do actually source and mine a lot of their own raw materials and have a lot greater control over their whole sustainability message. So once again, I do have some more slides. I've got one more slide, and then I'm going to hand off to Eamon. So Teams clearly is their flagship collaboration product. At Bytes, we use it all the time, and all the devices themselves are designed to make sure that the collaboration experience is best in class. So from the microphones that they use to the speakers that they have, their whole design premise is that they want to design and provide an experience that is as good as the sort of the person in the room that it's hardest to access. So if they've got a meeting where you've got a number of people physically in the meeting room and you've got one person that is remote, their ambition is to make sure that remote worker or business partner has just the same experience as the people in the room. And they've got a number of different features, hardware and software that they have to enable that to happen. So the whole Teams application has come on leaps and bounds. And once again, if Teams itself is something that you're interested in finding out more about and some of the latest developments and the product roadmap, then we can certainly make that happen. So with that in mind, hopefully that's a quick scene setter around the physical hardware. I'm going to hand off to Eamon.
Yeah, hi there. Unfortunately, guys, you're going to have Oh, I'm getting a bit of an echo. Perfect. Yeah, hi there, guys. I know that you're expecting Eamon, but you're going to stuck with me with a couple of slides first, then we'll hand over to Eamon. But thanks, Darren, for doing the kind of overview on the Surface hardware side of stuff. So there's going to be a number of different Microsoft technologies which will be discussed today. Some of the key components are actually displayed on the screen at the moment. So one, for those that aren't aware, will be Azure Active Directory, which is a cloud-based identity and access management service. Windows 10, which is, as probably most of you are aware, is the operating system. Autopilot, which is the deployment methodology. Intune, or known as Endpoint Manager nowadays, which is used to manage the actual devices. And Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite, also shortened to EMS, which is a comprehensive suite of security tools. So Eamon will delve into kind of those technologies in a day in the life across all of those. But we'll also be discussing the Bytes Managed Workspace, also known as the great name as BMW. So unfortunately today we won't be offering any promo codes or any great deals to purchase a new car, but actually we'll be talking about the Bytes Device Managed Service, which is designed to support the end-to-end life cycle of a device. We'll also be discussing the key problems it solves, the different support options you have available. But now I'm going to hand to Eamon. Eamon's going to run through the overview of the Microsoft Endpoint Management technologies. So thanks, Eamon.
Thanks, Hannah. Just before I do that, Darren, there was a question from Kevin during your session around advanced exchange and charging. I don't know if that's something you want to pick up now, Darren, or whether we pick it up later on at the end. Just wanted to pause for a second before I jumped into my next piece.
Okay, let me just double check the chat, and I'll add to that just before we close it. Okay.
Perfect. And obviously, just following on from that theme, if there are questions, please do feel free to jump in at any point and drop them in the chat. And I think Hannah and Darren, who will be keeping an eye on the chat, if needs be, they can interrupt and as we go through, because we're keen for this to be as interactive as is possible. So, morning all again. BMW is a service to run and manage devices, and a lot of the technology that's under there we'll talk about. I'm covering endpoint tooling and how we run and manage that endpoint tooling using Endpoint Manager. It's a solution that has kind of changed names and updated names a lot in the past. So we're going to really get under the covers of endpoint management using Microsoft Endpoint Manager. A little bit of a tongue twister there to start me off, just a perfect way to start. However, I just want to talk a little bit about device trends, because when we talk about endpoint management and device management in general, we really are talking about the move towards modern management. And there's a lot of trends out there that are encouraging and pushing this forward. Obviously, the last 18 months have been a fairly major catalyst in terms of remote working and new ways of deploying and managing devices. But actually, the trends themselves have been around for a long time. And first and foremost, a survey by Flexera has indicated that a huge number of organizations are now allowing a cloud adoption and BYOD devices. So when we talk about modern management, we really have to encourage, include a lot of BYOD as part of our management strategy. So how we manage not just the corporate devices, but the BYOD devices. Secondly, when we think about device management, I think one of the most common conversations that myself and Hannah and Darren probably are on is around device updates and device security. How do we keep devices up to date? Win 10 introduced Windows as a service, which allows feature updates and quality updates. And it is pretty intense. Whilst at a minimum it's normally once a month, depending on the types of updates you're doing, be they quality updates, you can have several updates a month. Across a large estate, that's a challenging thing to do. It's fundamentally part of the service we operate, and use Intune deployment rigs to achieve that. And that's kind of one of the real benefits of Intune Modern Management, is taking real control and security over the updates that we can do. Secondly, we talked about 95% of organizations using personal devices. I think if you take another skew on that, 60% of organizations, according to Tech Republic, an article last year, are now allowing people to use apps on their personal devices to get at corporate resources. And I think we have to embrace that and understand that that's about flexibility, but we also need to understand how we manage that. So again, our service is around using products like Intune and MCAS to have sensible strategies about how we manage those applications, whilst not affecting the personal device usage that user would expect. And that is quite a kind of both a cultural and a technical aspect that we need to get our head around. And I think we could move the whole morning onto talking about security. There's a CISO magazine article said that in 2020 we had 36,000 global records exposed. I think we can probably pull hundreds of stats out in terms of how much ransomware is out there right now. I think more than anything else, when we look at device management, we look at really device data and identity management as part of a single piece, so that we make that our number one priority as part of managing what Endpoint Manager can do, but more importantly, what we can do as part of the BMW service that Hannah referred to. And I think as we go into the cloud journey, and today we'll talk a little bit about that management cloud journey, the trends are interesting, but what they highlight is that the prevalent classic IT and modern somewhat clash at times, and there is tension there. Organizations that we work with have invested heavily in their previous implementations, gold images, traditional life cycle, and in the vast cases they work well. So there's a hesitance to change. I think where we are seeing people looking at changing to more modern management is this idea of working with better updates, better patching, and those kind of key things. But what we really want to encourage this morning is that it's not an all or nothing. Putting both classic IT and modern IT, where we're getting the best of both worlds, and as we transition, is probably one of the key themes. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the options as you do that transition to full Endpoint Manager or full Microsoft management in the cloud, if that's kind of where you want to go. And that's ultimately where the capabilities of Endpoint Manager come in. It really is a collection of technologies, and Hannah had a slide up there a minute ago. It's around Intune, Config Manager, which is really System Center on premise, but it also includes all the capabilities in Windows 10 and Autopilot and Azure AD. And we will touch on each of those as we go through the following slide. And ultimately, BMW uses Endpoint Manager to do what we call the device lifecycle, that provisioning of devices to start with, the managing and securing of devices, and then ultimately retiring or resetting or bringing devices back into the environment as people leave, and so on. One thing I will say is, quite often on conversations, we get asked, what is Endpoint Manager? We've got all these kind of different tools. It isn't such a new set of technologies. It's a rebranding and a collection of technologies. System Center, Config Manager, and Intune brought together in one platform with a cloud-enabled front end, and that really is what Endpoint Manager is. There are some licensing things that we need to look at, and Hannah, when I hand back to her in a small bit, will talk us through some of those, so we can look at the impact of licensing when we talk about Endpoint Manager and where that sits. So for the next remainder of my piece, for about 20 minutes or so, what I want to do is spend a section on each of those three elements of the device life cycle and what Endpoint Manager and BMW brings to that, and some of the things you might want to consider if you are at the beginning of this journey, or even halfway through the journey, some of the things you might want to turn on, enable, and bring back part of your service. So we're going to cover the supply of devices, the managing and securing of devices, and then ultimately the retiring of devices. And if we jump in and we have a look at the technology, there is a lot of technology that really sits behind this, and the technology we're really going to focus in on is Windows 10 Autopilot and Intune. And I think since Microsoft introduced Autopilot, we were here in the UK with one of the councils up north, without naming them. Actually, with Microsoft, we did one of the first pilots of the Autopilot concepts and technologies. We had previously built a Windows on the fly over the air, I think is what we called it back then, many years ago, a Windows over the air service. So we worked with Microsoft to deploy the first Autopilots. And Autopilot has significantly changed how we view device deployment, and it couldn't have come at a better time for organizations in the last 18 months when we were trying to deploy devices to people in their homes and so on. And there's a number of components, I suppose. First and foremost is Autopilot. And really this is where either new, recycled devices are provisioned. Autopilot really does support that provisioning to end user. However, as we talk about a bit later, there are other options in there. But ultimately, the device is registered from the manufacturer, from the distributor, and then we're able to do a device is recognized as an Autopilot device, and we're able to deploy directly to the user. The second thing, once we've deployed a device, is we use cloud management to then run and manage drop applications, drop policies, and let Intune manage that device. So things like automatic enrollment, all of those kind of key things are managed by the Intune process. Again, there are some licensing constraints that we need to look at, but once we have Intune, we're able to then do things like cloud reset. So all of the capabilities that allow us to manage a fully joined device. Now, again, there's a strategy to get there, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I think the final piece, if we're going to look at a fully managed workspace, isn't just about getting the device out there and getting the device managed. It is about the security of that device, the updating of that device. And intrinsic to the service is security. So as part of running a device service, we include things like advanced analytics and configuring Defender itself, but where licensing allows Defender for endpoint, so we get the advanced security hunting and all of the features that Microsoft now have, award-winning features in the product, so that we're getting alerts on a kind of ongoing basis. In terms of how the service works itself, first and foremost, the BMW admins do manage the full joiners, movers, leavers process. The Autopilot profiles are configured and synchronized, and the device provision includes the connection to things like identity and management. So those two things tend to get confused, but ultimately we want to do two things for the device. We want to, one, secure its identity and get it connected to Azure AD if that's appropriate. And secondly, we want to, so we're managing the identity of the device properly and the security of the device properly. And then secondly, we're doing the Intune enrollment so that we have full device management and updates of the device. At core, one of the key things as part of our Autopilot build is we've introduced the Bytes Smart Setup package. And that really is a package that we include with the Autopilot build. And if anybody's worked on Autopilot or looked at Autopilot, one of the challenges is at times when the device arrives to the end user, how long it actually takes to do the build itself. So what we've tried to do is take some of those issues, things like timeouts, sorting out the installer order, so and things like start menu setup, so that when it hits the user, it is that bit quicker and it's preloaded. So we've extended the capabilities of the Autopilot build to make that as seamless as is possible. The second thing, which we've touched on a wee bit earlier, is the provisioning itself. And with our service here at Bytes, what we do is we do it through a provisioning portal and a purchasing portal, and we're able to support a number of formats. We can either go direct to the end user or a white glove pre-provisioning service, and probably a number of variations in between. And I think the last and final bit of kind of the how it works service is managing the licensing and managing the overall profile and user account management. If you've new joiners, you want them when they get their device at home, knows who they are, and the licenses are allocated, and vice versa when they leave or when something transitions, that those licenses are managed properly. So managing at scale the license management and profile management is also part of the service, and fundamentally, in terms of security, in terms of build standards, all of our builds are built to either NCSE standards, Cyber Essential Plus standards, and in some cases ISO standards, depending on the client requirements. From From a user perspective, how does this service work? First and foremost, it is, the analogy I often use is kind of the Christmas morning iPhone. It's a pretty easy process in terms of unboxing the device and plugging it in, and away you go. And there's a pretty standard set of things that the user will do. They'll set things like the region, they'll set up the keyboard preferences, they'll connect to a network, and they'll do the first sign-in. And that first sign-in is the piece where we're ultimately connecting to the Autopilot aware configuration. And at that point, Intune is enabled, and we're effectively doing the deployment. This is the bit where the device setup can be anywhere from 20 minutes to half an hour is kind of our go-to that we try and achieve. So the user can make a cup of coffee, but ultimately they've got a device up and running with all of the key applications that they need. And again, that uses our smart package to streamline that process. And then they do the final piece, like setting up pins or FIDO tokens or whatever it is from a security point of view, from an authentication point of view that you've configured as part of the service. Quick, efficient, and certainly when we look at remote working, that we should be able to manage and achieve. In terms of, that's kind of step one, that's the supply of the device. As you can see, it's fundamentally around Autopilot and Intune, and a provisioning service that makes sure we can deliver the device seamlessly and easily. When we look at managing and securing, they're two huge topics of how we use Endpoint Manager, but we're going to focus in on two topics today: unified management and some of the capabilities of unified management, and then built-in protection. What are the protections that we can offer from a security point of view? Unified management itself is a pretty large topic, and I think specifically what we're going to focus in on is some of the benefits of cloud management, how you get to cloud management. I've talked a lot about that so far, so how do you do that? We're talking about hybrid working and business continuity. We're going to talk about some of the top initial level of protection we can do in the device. And then huge topic for us right now is, customers are looking for the flexibility of virtual and physical at the same time. Okay, so let's start by looking at the benefits of cloud management. I've mentioned several times so far about traditional IT organizations that might be using things like System Center or any other kind of software deployment patching technologies on-prem, and those that are using kind of full cloud. Really, what we're trying to understand is an approach that achieves all three. And the slide really is trying to illustrate, sometimes the slide confuses, so hopefully I'll just try and keep this pretty simple. But the slide is trying to illustrate a journey that it will move from traditional to a shared model to a full cloud model, and a couple of variations in between. So first and foremost, an absolute go-to for an organization that's using that has locally joined devices, that is running something like System Center, is to do the tenant attach approach. That really is saying you can keep your devices outside Intune, you can keep your devices as they are, but you attach your configuration manager to Microsoft Endpoint Manager in the cloud. Often get asked, why would you do that? I mean, ultimately, you now get one console to start managing devices that you might, and just to not overly complicate this, but one of the real reasons that we do that is what we find with customers is brand new devices that are being rolled out. There might be mobile devices, there might be Surface devices. If they're brand new, we tend to go straight to cloud and manage them in Intune in the cloud. And what that creates is a scenario where you might have some of your devices cloud managed and some of your devices System Center managed. So you have two consoles for your admin teams. Ultimately, by doing cloud attach and tenant attach, we with one console can manage all of the brand new devices and all the previous devices. So one console. And then you can decide how you deploy. You can use both. You can have a scenario where you're using the combined service to do things like real-time client information, deploying of applications. Currently in a project, for example, right now with a customer that's deploying Office. We've done tenant attach, and we're using the config manager service in that way to allow us to deploy Office to all of the applications to do an Office refresh. So again, it just brings on some of that manageability kind of earlier into the cycle. The next step we'll find customers doing is co-management, and that's where ultimately the device is both joined to the local domain and to the Azure AD domain, and we enroll it in Intune. And why would you do that? Again, it just allows you to take the best of both worlds. You can use System Center to do some of your patching, some of your application updates, and you can use Intune to do policy updates. And you can slowly, almost in test, move some of those workloads from using both products to both. which then gets you kind of to the third part of this cloud journey, which is full cloud managed. And in our experience, really, in a lot of cases, that can take some time. But our final really recommendation from this slide is, if you are provisioning new surfaces, that we will go direct to Azure AD. It gives us all the benefit of single sign-on, all of the kind of key things we'd like to do. And particularly if you do endpoint management and co-management, you get one console to manage everything. And that just makes it a much more seamless management environment. So relatively complicated slide, but I think it's the key essence of how you get to a co-managed Microsoft Endpoint Manager world is going through that journey. The second thing that we really want to highlight is, once you've done Intune management, is take the benefit of continuity through device updates. Probably the biggest issue we come across on a day-by-day basis, device updates, keeping devices up to date seamlessly and easily. When we have Endpoint Manager in place, we can support two different models. We can support a intelligent edge for the devices that are still sitting on premise, so domain joined devices, and we can do intelligent cloud for cloud joined devices. So it allows us to set up Intune deployment rings to manage that path cycle, so that we have the security, because I think understandably that's one of the concerns people have about patching, is that, you know, what effect will that have on users. So patching rings are definitely something that we highly encourage and will be part of the service. And here's a very brief example of what that might look like. So if we look at we've Win 10 update rings. We have one particular update ring in place here, which is this update now ring, and we get some stats about our devices. It probably wouldn't be massively surprising that one of the key things when we speak to people is, do we even know how well your devices are patched? And it becomes quite a big exercise. Well, with this tooling, we know immediately what devices are patched, what aren't patched, and what level they're up to. So just even that information is a huge step forward. If we look at the properties of this particular one, we'll get to see the granularity of what we can do in an update ring. So, for example, we know that this is a semi-annual channel, so it's a feature update, the twice yearly feature update. We know we can do things like allow the user to pause, when we do reminder resets, all of those things that you can build into the environment. And this is where we eat our own dog food here. You know, as a managed service provider, we have to make sure our devices are updated. I get an amount of time where I know it's not going to restart my machine, but I do get to control that experience quite simply and easily. The next section really is about protecting users and some of the aspects, and we'll cover protection in its entirety in a few minutes in a section. But one of the areas I really wanted to focus in here is, when we talk about protecting users, one of the key areas is passwords and password management, and all of the topics that sit around password management. So it's a big topic, and really, as part of Endpoint Manager and as part of the service, as part of BMW, one of the key things is to roll out things like self-service password reset, so that we take some of the burden away from IT in terms of managing passwords. The other key thing that is buried in everybody's license, in most of my experience, is services like my staff. So if you are an organization that has frontline or remote teams, or teams that are managed, one of the great services that you have that's, in my view, quite underutilized is the My Staff service. And the My Staff service allows you to let trained end users, so there might be team managers, team admins, to actually manage the user experience for their team. So it might be a construction team out in the field, it might be a dedicated team sitting in one particular area of the business. We can distribute the ability to reset and manage some of that profile information, some of that user information closer to the field, and it distributes and also gives a bit more autonomy to those teams. So the My Staff service is something that we highly recommend, and it's certainly a key part of unified management. And the last section before we kind of move into more security stuff, firstly is this idea of virtual and physical. Absolutely, in the last year, maybe 2 years, the need to provide the ability to do physical and virtual devices. Virtualization has been around for a long time, but you know, COVID really extended the need to be able to push out devices and push out applications. So virtualization was a huge way that a lot of our customers achieve some of the workload goals they needed as part of the last kind of 2 years. So supporting virtualization in whatever format has been part of our service for a very long time. I think just to add to the mix though, one of the things that happened in July is Microsoft, in their words, came out with a kind of a new category of PC, a cloud PC. So cloud PC is nothing new, but from a Microsoft perspective, they introduced Windows 365, which is effectively kind of a category between the physical device and the fully virtual device that we now have. So we kind of have that middle category. So on our service, we support both the Azure Virtual Desktop, or AVD, as we like to call it, and we also now support Windows 365. And I think one of the key things is, why would you use full physical? Why would you use Azure Virtual Desktop? And why would you use Windows 365? 365 has been now with us since July, end of July, August, and we're seeing quite a large uptake of it. And there are some really clear areas where Windows 365 makes sense for certain device types, for consistency in device cost. It's one price per user per month. There are other areas though where AVD is the right choice, where you're using virtualization at scale, and or you're using application that need Azure Virtual Desktop. So I think part of the service is understanding that you can use both. And I've managed to get this far without mentioning Windows 11. Obviously, Windows 11 has now been with us for a couple of months. Windows 11 is still a little bit in when we talk about enterprise scale and enterprise management, by the way, it's a little bit still in its infancy. Microsoft are still to launch. We've got a preview, but there's a whole management pack that's coming with Windows 11 that'll help us do some additional Intune stuff. One of my colleagues here has told me that there are something like 1,100 new settings that, from a endpoint manager point of view, we can now configure that we couldn't on Windows 10, but that's in review. So we're expecting proper enterprise level management of Windows 11 really to start in Q1 next year. So I'm sure many of you may already have it out there and playing with it, but in terms of enterprise grade management, Windows 11 really is something we're parking into next year. I change topics and we move to security and built-in protection. There are a number of key areas that we're going to go through, and I'll from a time point of view, I'll move on, but I'll step into these areas. But protecting company data, compliance, managing security breaches, and remediation are kind of the key goals for a well-protected, secure device. When it comes to device protection, we do a whole session on conditional access and data protection. So this is a very, very big topic, so I'm only really going to give it kind of 1 minute. But for us, what we've seen in the last couple of years is the need to manage remote workers, or manage workers wherever they might be, but manage from things like multi-factor authentication has become a go-to. However, when we look at something like MFA, it can be a little bit a blunt force. You can have issues about how you deploy it, and is it deployed for every workload. The summary of this slide really is saying, when we have Endpoint Manager and we have the tooling that we have in the Microsoft stack, we're really able to use the conditional access capability of Microsoft to be more contextual about when we need things to happen, i.e. do we need to restrict use, or do we need to be more dedicated in what we do with a particular user. So MFA can be configured to be scalable to when you need to turn it on and on what occasion you need to turn it on. It might be that you're only asking MFA to be used when a particular application is opened. That's all down to who the user is, what device they're on, where they are, and what risk the service feels that user has. So it's very contextual. So it's a big topic, but it's something that's fundamentally part of the service. The second is device compliance, and I think for me this is the real key, that a service that we need to look at when we're talking about management of devices. The threats coming from devices are very ever present. The opening slide I covered this morning really talked about the huge influx of BYOD, which again is nothing new, but has been very, very significant in the last kind of 18 to 24 months. And sometimes we don't know the state or the hygiene of that device. BYOD devices can be jailbroken, so we've got to really look at that. The key thing that Endpoint Manager, in particular Intune, gives us is an understanding of a device's compliance straight away, and we then get to make choices about what we let that device do or don't do, as the case may be, in our environment. Again, if it's non-compliant, we may still let it in, but we may insist on MFA for every single thing that device does, or we may completely block access. So we get that granularity, and depending on your licenses, we then have the thing for cloud app security to really control the application, control ingress of data based on device compliance. So we get to layer these into kind of a multiple layer of how we manage the device. In terms of securing device from a breach perspective, Defender for Endpoint, which is absolutely award-winning. Forrester have a number of articles out there where they say, get off the fence. Microsoft now are really a top breed security provider, and Defender for Endpoint, with some of its extended detection and response capabilities, really is award-winning right now. And it's fundamentally part of the service to configure the key elements that sit under Defender for Endpoint, things like attack surface reduction, the automatic investigation and remediation capabilities, where ultimately our focus is protect the device, protect the identity, and protect the data. And that's kind of a key thing that we would do. And that's automatically built into things like security baselines. So again, as a base build, as the devices are deployed, we will ultimately look at building some security baselines. And this just gives a very high-level example of 3 baselines. At Bytes, what we have is a whole set of pre-configured baselines that we will drop onto the tenancy just straight out of the box. One of the key things that is a principle for us is proactive remediation. One of the principles that we try and go by is as part of our kind of modern management practices, if a user is calling us, we fundamentally feel we're behind the curve, that we're not providing the service the user asked for. So the end goal really is to ensure that we're proactively using intelligent agents, fundamentally as part of the Intune service. We've looked to remediate any endpoint weaknesses. Any things that we know within the environment will fail, we'll try and detect, remediate using the standard Microsoft service, but extending that with our own scripts as well. So let's try and remediate the service, and in actual fact, we'll show an example of that in a second when we talk about device retiring. So the last section for me really is now that we've managed the device and secured the device and looked at just some of the technologies that are, and there is a lot of them in there, but some of the technologies that we would use to, get a good a modern life cycle working. We now have the end of life in terms of what we do with the device. And there are a couple of key considerations that we need to look at from an end of life perspective. First and foremost, revoking resources on devices, even things like personal data, corporate data on a personal device. So the ability to do that as part of the service without affecting the personal data is a key thing that we build into the service. Auditing of devices and tracking of devices and knowing where they are, in particular before they get into kind of bad actor hands, is a key part of the service. Retiring devices accounts and preparing devices for reuse is a key element that we need to consider. And then finally, remote assistance, being able to achieve all of that remotely. We're probably all familiar with the situations where retiring or removing or replacing a device meant a courier, or meant somebody bringing their device back in. Well, the device physically has to come back in if they're moving, but a lot of the activities around reissuing devices and reusing devices can be achieved remotely, and that's one of the key things, particularly beneficial in the last couple of years. So the last slide and last kind of little section I want to go on is endpoint analytics. Kind of the management is fantastic, but actually, how do we know what's actually going on in the environment? I literally was on a call with a customer this morning. That was one of these key things. How do we know that now I've put all these tools out there that I'm getting the kind of continuity of service that I expect? So Microsoft provide a lot of analytics, and one of the analytics, which is not specifically endpoint, but is around the user, is things like productivity score, and getting an insight into how the user is using the productivity tools. So that's one useful tool, but the tool that's really relevant for today is Endpoint Analytics. And this really includes metrics and recommendations on device performance itself, on some of the key areas like startup, which are the things that really annoy users. You want a fast, efficient device. Let's look at the stats and let's understand what the device is doing. And for us, as part of the continual service improvement element, we continually focus as part of our BMW service on endpoint analytics, the recommendations, and making sure they're delivered and that they're appropriately delivered. And if we look at kind of under the covers of the kind of things we get back from the devices, once we have them at least in the device attached state and attached in something like Intune, if we look at the reports that we can get back, immediately, if we go into endpoint analytics, we get an analytics score. There's a tongue twister for me. And in my particular example here, you can see that our baseline of 50, we've actually achieved that. So we're ahead of where we want to be, but it doesn't mean that we can sit back on our laurels. There are other things to do. You'll also see on the right-hand side that there's some recommendations. And for me, the big recommendation seems to be that we need to, the big recommendation here seems to be the 89% Windows devices not registered, and that's an important one. But the one that really stands out for me is the second one, 44% of devices on this network are not enrolled into Azure AD. So we're missing some of the single sign-on user enhancement capabilities that we could do. So it's giving us very clear, understandable stats. The other stats it's going to jump in are things like startup performance, system boot and system sign-in. They're things we really need to keep an eye on and try and maximize that whole experience for users. Not actually recommendations on this particular case, but you often will get recommendations about what we might do in terms of driver loads and those kind of key things. The remediations I spoke about earlier, here, for example, we have a remediation to restart an Office deployment should there be a failure. So no more ringing up the user, interrupting the user. If we detect the failure, we will automatically rerun the script. And then finally, recommended software. And I think, again, one of the recommendations here is the rollout of Azure AD. But those kind of key things that tell us what have we rolled out, how much our progress are we making, means we can keep track of the service. We keep track of where we are on the service and the kind of things we need to do to maintain the service. It's all built in. It's all part of the service. It's something that we highly recommend we use. So that was a snapshot of the 3 steps of the service. I'm now going to hand over to Hannah, who's going to take us through how that service might work in practicalities.
Thank you, Eamon. Before we do that, we've got a question for you, Eamon, in the chat window. In regards to Defender, how does Defender help to protect the ransomware and encryption viruses?
Oh, Defender for Endpoint actually has a number of strategies to do that. So the EDR, so the advanced detection response capabilities mean that we're looking for signatures on a pretty constant basis. So we're looking for expected ransomware signals. And we'll cut them off at inception. I think one of the key things that Defender for Endpoint does is it's part of the wider Defender product set. So if we have things like Defender for Office, so Defender was the renamed part of the product. So there are lots of Microsoft names, but now we have Defender for Office, Defender for Endpoint. One of the key things Defender for Endpoint will do is if a signature is picked up in, for argument's sake, an email, which is tend to be where ransomware come in the first place, or via an identity breach, Defender Endpoint can pick that up and secure the endpoint before it even gets anywhere near from email. So the joined up approach between the Office capabilities, so things like Exchange, the identity capabilities that are in Microsoft Defender for Identity, and Defender for Endpoint to come together in one hit. And that's fundamentally how we get ahead of ransomware before it even hits the device. But if it does hit the device and comes in from a different way, then Endpoint Advanced Detection and Response is the service that we configure to watch for ransomware.
Great. Is that the question answered for yourself, or do we want Eamon to elaborate any further?
That's answered, Jana. The another one question actually, how can the Defender maybe a endpoint protection to our servers basically? We only covered the endpoints, right? If I want to suggest Defender for our Windows servers, actually, will it be that sufficient one?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, obviously, the Defender for Endpoint is the same capabilities on server. It's a different configuration, but it's the exact same. So we use the same capabilities. Obviously, today we're more focusing on Win 10 Endpoint, but it's the same product, same capabilities.
Got it. Okay. So in terms of the ransomware or encryption attack, actually, the Defender lets any one of the devices to attack it based on it actually the signals it try to prevent other devices. Is that what you exactly mean? Or?
Yes. Yes, in its simplest. I think one of the key things that we're saying is Microsoft treat each of the tools as a collection of tools. So they will, when a threat comes in, it will come in lots of different sources. Microsoft, if you have the tool set, which is ultimately what the service is about, what Microsoft will do is they link each of those into one case. So where a threat is across multiple domains, and by domains we mean email, identity, and the device, they get linked together to work out. And that's where sometimes when you don't use the stack together, I mean, one of Microsoft's, and I'm conscious I'll come back to you in a second, Hannah, but one of the key strengths of the Microsoft approach, which I firmly believe right now, is that it is able to look at the landscape. If you're using Sophos, and I'm not saying that's good or bad product, by the way, but when we're using multiple products, you as an IT team have to join the dots on how those products make each other aware. In a Microsoft case, all of the 3 products are ultimately connected, and Microsoft will link cases. So wherever the threat comes from, we get, in some cases, automatic remediation. So it'll link it as a case, say we feel this device, this identity has an impact on the following areas. So we'll put it into one case and then remediate automatically. Or at a minimum, it's going to warn you that it finds the following threat and it wants you to take an action. So it does link up the tooling in one interface. Sorry, I know you've got a bit to get through, Hannah.
That makes sense, actually. No, well, let's take in this case. So the linking to that one thread, actually, no, that device, whatever sits with our tenant, actually link to that one thread, or is it something actually irrespective of threads, whatever the device actually it's using that a Defender, it will link into that one thread and it will try to protect all other Microsoft devices, whatever it connects, irrespective of company-wide tenant.
Yeah, it'll automatically remediate the device in question that's causing the problem. If you configure it to do that, and you get to configure what you want it to do automatically or not. But if it sees it as a for want of a better word, a global threat, it will automatically protect all the other devices in sequence, and it gives you a report of what it's done. So yeah, it's first of all creating a case across where the threat has come in from, across the different domains, and then it provides an automatic remediation. There are times, but let's be clear that the attack will happen post. So you could have that X% of your devices are already hit. Where that's happened and where it can, it will then continue to remediate where it can past that point. So it's not always guaranteeing that it'll stop everything at the front door, because that's not always possible, and frankly it's not expected. But where it can and where it can provide remediation scripts, it will continue to remediate, or at least give you recommendations what you can do to back that out. Particularly ransomware is obviously the key issue, but where we can, it gets ahead of that.
Got it.
Great. Is there any further questions at this stage?
I will, if that topic is of interest, and we can maybe catch up offline. We have a 15-20 minute demo which very nicely takes you through that experience end to end, and shows you what you need to configure and how you need to configure. So we've got a piece that just explains that in a little bit more than I've done now, but you get to see how that experience works. So if that's of interest, we can touch base after and take you through the configuration and actually the experience that you'd have both from an end user and from an admin perspective.
Sure, definitely that will work for me.
Okay, we'll do a follow-up on that if that's okay.
Perfect.
Great. Apologies, guys, we might overrun by kind of 5 minutes, but if you need to drop off, please do. Obviously, the session's recorded, so you can always watch back later. But the last section will be on the Bytes Managed Workspace offering that was kind of briefly discussed at the beginning. So when considering the life cycle of a device and a user, we've actually broken down the BMW service into 4 key areas. So step 1 being the setup and acquisition. This can consist of a device refresh if required, configuring the existing estate that you have. We work with the JML process. We enroll devices into AAD and Intune, and we set up any third-party infrastructure that might be needed. Kind of step 2 and step 3 are quite interlinked, but step 2 we call kind of proactive support. So this really consists around the management, the patching, the upgrading, the deployment of the operating system, any applications, any security policies. Whereas kind of the reactive support, that's focused more around the end user incidents and tickets. So this can range from kind of the classic blue screen of death, dare I say, to permission changes, to application access issues around kind of Teams and OneDrive, or kind of the old classic, if you haven't set up self-service password reset, of kind of actually resetting password for users. And finally, and as Amy kind of touched on the last point of his presentation, the decommissioning phase. So arguably, a lot of people forget about it, but it's one not to forget about. This element of support really focuses on the JML process, any remote wipe requirements that might be needed, any repurposing of devices that might be necessary. So the service is actually broken down into 2 options, because not all customers will require the full first or third line managed service. The BMW service is charged on a per user per month basis. So depending on the level of support that you require, the pricing is actually tiered. So as I mentioned, not all customers do need the full service because they have an existing in-house team. So the second and third line option can help internal teams by either providing additional resources when resourcing is tight, but also Microsoft technology is ever evolving. Therefore, for busy teams whose kind of sole focus is not on kind of Microsoft's product adaptation, the BMW service can actually leverage subject matter experts to help with your estate. Alternatively, kind of on the other side of the coin, if a customer has a small IT team and you'd rather have your team focused on the kind of business critical, industry specific applications, then maybe a full first, third line service would suit you better. But I know there's kind of the old question of why should I consider outsourcing? How does it help? Well, the BMW service is designed to kind of solve three key business problems. To improve the user satisfaction, so the service does include regular surveying, comparison to NPS scores. Users are happier when devices and the support they're receiving is more efficient. So this links really nicely to where BM focuses on the productivity of users. Workforces with higher quality devices are more productive as applications load faster and what can be achieved in a day actually is increased. And of course, as Eamon's touched upon in his presentation, a service like BMW wouldn't be able to function unless we were ensuring the security team's requirements were met. So the devices are built to the standard of the NCSC guidelines. We also take into consideration the ISO and the cyber essentials where required. But for many of you on the call, I'm sure that you have device state which ranges in makes, models, differing operating system levels. So BMW strives to standardize devices. So both for the BMW and actually for the internal IT team, management is so much easier. And kind of the last key problem kind of area to discuss is for CFOs and kind of IT directors, it's always a big hit. It's a predictable billing model. As it's a per user per month cost, you always actually forecast your IT spend over the year. So as the service is charged monthly, it allows users to be removed and joined on a monthly basis. This means that if you've got any kind of new staff joining or it's a holiday season where you release staff, then your IT costs would actually go down and you'd have to worry about paying for more than you're actually consuming, which is quite a good hit. I'd also like to delve further into some of the benefits of BMW. So we've chatted about some of them already, but I'll focus on a couple of them. So the BMW service is really designed to be flexible. So what do I mean by this? Well, customers have the choices, whether it's on a device, they pick the level of support most appropriate for them, whether the MDM tooling is SCCM, Intune, or co-management. And again, the costing, can't forget that, flexes up and down as your business does. But also, there is a huge benefit of having a unified supplier. So some of you today on the call might be new to Bytes, others already might have existing relationships, but having a multi-vendor environment can cause problems with who owns the overall responsibility when things go wrong. So Bytes have the ability to help you with your licensing, Microsoft and non-Microsoft services, but most importantly, the BMW service, which to be honest, is the core of your business, which is the user's device. So Bytes can give a great overlay and kind of be the, God, I use the expression, one throat to choke almost, on how services are actually being run. So a lot of customers ask us, kind of what is the licensing criteria? Well, the service is suitable for those that are on the Microsoft Business Premium, Microsoft 365 E3 and E5 SKUs. The higher the SKU that you're on, then the more that we can roll out to your devices. But when we're actually considering what is the minimum licensing requirement, well, as kind of displayed on the screen, it's Windows 10 Pro, Azure Active Directory P1, and Intune. So your account manager at Bytes can actually work with you to work out the most cost-effective way to license your workforce if you're interested in BMW. So I'm just going to hand to Darren for a moment, just to cover another slide on the Surface side of things.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. So just quickly, Surface as a service really just enables you to get access to the hardware and pay for it on a monthly basis, and we can wrap in the service or services that Hannah and Eamon have been talking about. So just in a nutshell, the Surface as a device has a very strong residual value, so it's worth quite a bit of money after its 2 or 3 year term. So what we do is we operate, I think, a residual value-based financing. So if, for example, the device costs £1,000 and if after 3 years it's worth £200, we knock off £200 off of the £1,000 up front to leave £800, and we then apply the finance charge. So you're actually only paying back a level of interest on the £800. So what that means is that over a 3 year term, you pay back less than if you're going to pay out the full capital up front. So it's a very agile way for you to get access to a device and pay for it on a monthly basis. We also have other financial products. One is a carbon zero operational lease as well. So once again, if one of your priorities is that sustainability, then that particular lease will certainly work for you there, because we can offset any carbon associated with the whole deal as part of that. And we also have the ability for you to send back the equipment whenever you like as well, as another product. So we have a number of different financial products, all geared around giving you best value, maximizing your cash flow, and helping ensure that any financial product that you take is directly aligned with your key business priorities, whether they be sustainability or flexibility. We can include in that services and licensing subscriptions as well. So once again, if you have any new joiners and you're looking for a fixed cost per head, per employee per month, then this type of service as a service is exactly the service that's right for you. Kevin's just asking a question. So that was all I was going to sort of touch on there. We clearly have lots of different pieces of marketing collaterals around this. The Microsoft flagship headquarters is now back open for business. So we can take you to their customer immersion center, so you get access to all this equipment and all these services as well. But if I hand back to Hannah, she can then close off and confirm any next steps.
Thanks, Darren. Yeah, so there are a couple of options on what next steps. Oh, my computer's went a little funny there. Sorry, guys. On what next steps can be. So firstly, there is actually a possibility that your organization may be eligible for a free of charge Microsoft funded workshop. So there are a number of different workshops in this funding group. As you can see, kind of one of the top ones that most be relevant from this topic today is the Endpoint Manager one. So if you're interested in finding out if you're eligible, all you've got to do is contact your account manager with your tenant ID and they'll check for you. You might be eligible for multiple ones, so worth putting it through, because we're in the big kind of running of take the free funding from Microsoft where you can. But yes, on the other side though, if you unfortunately aren't eligible for a Microsoft workshop, then there is the opportunity to have a BMW EUD workshop. So this workshop can be more tailored, but it does cover the key components of delving further into the Microsoft technologies, reviewing your current endpoint estate and application estate. Once again, if you're interested, then let us know either today or your account manager will happily set up a call, could discuss agendas, structure and pricing. But yeah, that was all that was going to be covered, unless Darren or Eamon, anything else you wanted to add?
No, that's everything from himself, Hannah. Eamon?
No, we're all good, thank you. Obviously, there's a couple of follow-ups there, so really thank you for your attendance. There's a lot of information in there, and I think the workshops that Hannah talked about go into a lot of detail from a technical and deployment perspective, so really appreciate your time.
Great stuff. Thanks to Hannah and Eamon and for Catherine for setting up, and thank you all for taking the time to listen to our webinar. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers all. Have a good one. Happy Thanksgiving, apparently. See you later.